evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and the two guests this evening are Jim Modugno and Frank Bellini. And the topic we want to thrash at this evening is term limits. And Jim, you started off running some data on term limits and what the history of it is. So what'd you find?
Well, let me just, can I share the screen here?
Yeah.
Okay. So what you're seeing here is I started looking at, we all know that the President of the United States has only two terms, 2 4-year terms. I wanted to know and look into more detail about term limits for governors. And what I found was, in this particular slide I put together, is all the ones in the opening where 2 consecutive 4-year terms is, and there's 23 states there that those states all have it. And the interesting parts are, you can look at them right there. Then there's 2 consecutive 4-year terms, and then what they call a 1-term pause, and that's in Indiana, Wyoming, and Oregon. Montana is just 2 consecutive 4-year terms. Then you get a pause for 2 terms, which would be, you'd have to pause for 8 years. Alaska, California, Delaware, and there's a few others there. 2 4-year terms, that's it, you're done for the lifetime. Don't come back, right? Virginia is 1 4-year term, which I was aware of. All the others down below, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, Texas, and all of them are no term limits at all. New Hampshire and Vermont do have unlimited 2-year terms. So they're not necessarily 4. The remaining have unlimited 4-year terms. So that was the very first slide I took. And I said, all right, that's interesting. So then I decided I'd show term limits for state legislators throughout the United States. And what you have up above here is the states on the left-hand side, and then you have the limit for the House and the limit for the Senate within their states. So you got 8 years limit and 8 years in the Senate and the states next to it. California, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Nevada have a limit for 12 years, both in the House and their Senate. Michigan has 6 in their House, 8 in their Senate. Nebraska has no limits at all in their House, and 8 when it gets to the limit of the Senate. So that was kind of like my opening salvo as to what's out there. And as we all know, there's no term limits at all on federal positions running for senator or House seats, House of Representatives. There's no term limits, and I think it shows it. So you want me to take that down?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I'll stop sharing.
So I guess the question comes down to one of what's the chances, or what's the possibility of enacting something like that at the federal level? Because we do have a like you mentioned, a two-term limit on the president, and that was a reaction, I think, mostly to FDR. So what is it going to take? Some president or doing that again, and then it ripples down into the Senate or into the House. How do we make this happen?
Frank, did you want to join in, or do you want me to go first?
Yeah.
Boy, I think on the one hand, you've got risks, and on the other hand, you've got rewards.
Yeah.
But to sell this on a federal level, I think it's like trying to sell drought to farmers. There's just too much to be had on a personal basis for these people that spend a career in Congress. They're all rich. They're all filthy rich, if I may say so. And that's an incentive that's hard for people to back away from. And if personally they feel as though they should back away from it, professionally, there are colleagues who are not going to like that decision. So, you're stuck here. This is a tough issue.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Frank. It's extremely difficult. The House and the Senate, our elected officials today would have to feel the urge from the public to actually pass term limits themselves. And I think that's probably not going to ever happen based on what we're looking at, the way they're performing right now. And you're right. You think about the people when they go to Washington, D.C. You talked about their rich factors, but here's the thing. It's their career politicians. They live in that world. It's all about the power. It's all about the privilege, and it's always about the prestige too. They love being in Washington, D.C. And the problem with them is they actually have an upper hand on anybody who wants to run against them, right? For all intents and purposes. They're sitting in the power. Washington, D.C. is loaded with nothing but power and money. So you have 80,000 lobbyists sitting right there in Washington, D.C. on either L Street or K Street or both of them, who can influence them with their money. And there's a number that's, I wouldn't give the number, but they know there are others who influence them who are not lobbyists. So, and they go to Washington, and I think they lose touch with the problem. And so term limits at the end of the day term limits at that level or any level helps to get big money out of politics. And right now, Congress is not going to step over. They're not going to step aside and say, hey, take this away, because you look around for the career politicians. They never want to leave Washington, D.C. Many of them, when they decide not to run again, they stay in Washington, D.C. and they work for lobbyist firms or special law firms and other things. It's money, it's Nabanya there. They got it all for them. Term limits for Congress, I think it would take political courage. And that would mean you would have to have a lot of leaders. And I'm not so sure we have a lot of leaders. Think about some of the votes that they passed just recently since the new elections came through. They vote as blocks. The Democrats vote as block. The Republicans, not so much all the time, but they do on occasion too. I think whether you're in the House or whether you're in the Senate, as long as you're in Washington, you're in the game and you're part of the establishment, and that goes a long way. But if you look at it, I think term limits would give voters more choices at the ballot box. Elections and really think about this: elections are not term limits, right? If you want to run against even the local guy down here in Moulton, right over there, who's in this district now as a House of Representative. Think about the thing. Running against him would take millions of dollars to get him out. And we also live in a state that's very Democratic Party dominated in the legislature and so forth. And I just want to say they do really work hard at keeping themselves in office.
When you start to talk about this ingrained effect, even the young Mr. Kennedy could not unseat the senator when he ran against him. I mean, as big as a name and a following that Kennedy had, it wasn't enough to knock Markey off. And Markey has not done anything spectacular that I can imagine that would endear him to the
That's for
population.
sure.
It's just he's got the better machine because he's been there longer.
Yeah, I mean, we have.
Jim, you're saying?
I was going to say in the state of Massachusetts, we are blessed with an abundance of career politicians who all qualify for running for president of the United States. We always have at least 3 or 4 of them from the state of Massachusetts running. This time was no different. I pick on my House Representative Moulton, but the bottom line is when he got to Congress, he wasn't even there 2 years, and next time he got elected, he was running for Speaker of the House, lobbying for that, and then another term after that, he's running for president of the United States. We had Lizzie, we had him, we had Bill Weld, a carryover that was out there on the table. I mean, they come out of the woodwork. What's his name? Deval Patrick, right? The former governor, right, from the western part of the state. He was going to run, right? Get out and put his name on the ballot for a while. It's amazing. And that's the power of the money that's out there. How do you beat that? But it trickles down to even like the State House and Charlie Baker, who's a Republican, I guess a name only, but the legislature is almost dominated both on the House side and the Senate side with Democrats across the board. And the interesting part that I learned in the last election is that Charlie had a super PAC that he was running, and it basically supported himself on his run. But what he did is, when Jim Lyons took over the Republican Party, they moved that PAC to a different PAC, and they called it the Massachusetts Majority Political Action PAC. Now, why am I bringing that up? It's because Charlie's PAC spent $94,000, right? And they backed 11 Democrat incumbents, legislators, and one Republican, how would you say, incumbent. He also backed 2 Democrats running for the governor's council, of which of the 94,000, he spent 53,000 on those 2 candidates alone. Even our local guy, Jerry Pasella, received $8,300 from the super PAC. Jerry's a Democrat, right? And it was for his literature to help him run against Rick Marciano, right? So what I'm saying is, it doesn't matter whether they're Democrats or Republicans. They're all in the same PAC.
Yeah.
It's them and then the people.
Yeah. The other thing that has to be looked at from a foundation point of view for this topic is that terms in the U.S. Congress for the House are 2 years.
Correct.
And that's probably not long enough, because by the time they get down to Washington and get first elected, it's time for them to start their next election campaign. And if they were honest, I would say that the amount of time that they spend on their upcoming election is compromised greatly against the amount of time that they spend serving the public and serving in the institution itself. And so you get that conflict in the House. It puts them in a position where, needing money, the path of least resistance is to go to that organization that you're talking about here, Jim.
Yep.
And to get it the easy way, so to speak.
Frustrating.
Yeah, so I think the short terms in the House are mitigating against this too. I had one friend who we discussed this subject many years ago, and he said, "Hey, how about an 8-year term for senators and representatives, but that's it. Then it's see you later. Go find a job." You need a modernized approach for sure.
Absolutely.
We're not an agricultural economy anymore like we were back in the 1700s. But at the same time, people do change jobs a lot these days, and you can't go through life saying, "I'm going to have the same job that I did last year or the year before or the decade before." You've got to be flexible, and I don't know how you get by that machinery, however, that you're talking about, which most assuredly exists in Massachusetts and most assuredly exists in most every other state too. That's a tough one.
I think George, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think you're starting to raise the question of when this country was founded, as you pointed out, Frank, it was predominantly subsistence farmers everywhere. And a few states and cities like Salem, Massachusetts, were filthy rich because they were in the China trade and a few other things like that. But as you point out, the country has changed dramatically. And there's always this furor over, should we continue with the College of Electoral College? And part of the reason for the Electoral College was, number one, people didn't know who was running. So you depended upon a few knowledgeable people in your community who had their ear to the ground and were connected, and they knew who was running so they could make an intelligent decision. So you elect somebody who would make an intelligent decision for you. And the major problem that brought that on, I think, was one that we just didn't have the mass communication we have now. So whether we like it or not, anybody who wants to run, all he has to do is get a Twitter account and not run afoul of the correct. And he can contact, or she can contact all the citizens and get their message out. So part of the reason for the Electoral College disappears, but the other part of that reason is we don't want to be run by the cities on the West Coast and the East Coast, because there's more to America than just the two coasts. So the question I think that's bothering me is, how good is a federal republic as a system of government?
Well, you look at it, and the way it's set up is probably nothing's ever perfect, but it's supposed to be a representative type of government by the people. And the problem is when you have people who are career politicians, we see them all over the place. They're local as mayors, they're local as councilors in your town, even though they're part-time positions. You have them clearly in Congress. It becomes extremely difficult because to Frank's position that he stated, and I think he was correct, a 2-year term for some of these people. I mean, their job, if they're career politicians, their very first priority is to get themselves reelected, whatever it takes to get them reelected. That's their priority number one. Down in Washington, the second priority for them is to take care of everybody else in the world. And the third priority today is average Americans have moved to third place in this whole equation now. And part of it goes back to how do you change this system? How do you get term limits in there? They're not going to roll over. I think you have to start at local levels, state levels. Like Massachusetts had term limits in there for a period of time. Unfortunately, they went in through a different way. They actually had to change state constitution, needed to change to allow it, and they went in through an initiative. And that happened to 3 other states the same way, where the people had got to it. But you look at Nevada. I took Nevada. I just dug into a few of them. Nevada really got my interest because, they have a lifetime 12 years. And I said, okay, this is pretty interesting. How much they pay these people? And what they do is they pay them a certain stipend each day, what they're in office, like $163. And they get a per diem because they be coming to wherever they're coming around the state. And that was another 53. When I added it all up, they can only get 60 days worth of pay in the year. So in other words, they're being paid about $10,000 is what they are. What they are is like part-time legislators, like they are up in New Hampshire. And if you're not there, and look at our guys, they're part-time positions, but they're making $70, $80, $90, $100,000 at the State House in terms of those people.
Probably 140,000. Yeah.
Yeah, I was okay. Yeah. I'm probably on the low side.
I got a 40% raise.
Yeah, and let me ask this question. We all know the answer, but I'll ask it anyways. And who gave them that raise?
They gave it to themselves. Yeah.
They gave it to themselves. Not only once, they've done it twice in the last 3 years in the middle of the night. And they don't apologize for it. We can't get our hands on them unless it's at the polls.
Yeah.
And that's
but Jim, it's a one-party state here in Massachusetts.
I know.
That's a given. You can't, until you escape that, you're not going anywhere with this or any other big issue like this.
Yeah.
Most states are one-party states. Rhode Island is. It always has been, as far as I can remember.
Yeah.
The only thing that changed in Rhode Island is the ethnic background of the Democrats. I think I told you before. It went from the Irish to the Italians.
All those Irish.
But anyway.
On St. Patrick's Day, here we are criticizing the Irish.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
You're not an Italian, are you?
Yeah. Yes, I am Italian.
Yeah. Me too.
I'm outnumbered already. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway, but I mean, that's where I'm getting to the point of, do we need a totally different form of government? Because I think inherent in this federal republic is the concept that you're going to end up with essentially 2 parties, and that's it. There's no I mean, if you start to talk about Europe and their parliamentary system of government, they've got multiple parties. So there's no one party that can really dominate very easily.
Good point.
So I'm starting to wonder, at the same time, we have a good thing going with the Electoral College that makes sure everybody gets represented, and the concept of the Senate with 2 senators per state makes sure everybody gets represented.
Right,
But
that's
the
balanced.
House is big cities.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, the bottom line is your points are well taken. If you're going to run in Massachusetts for any state position or anything, you have to run it as Democrat if you want to get elected.
Yeah.
It's just impossible to you can be the second coming of Superman here in terms of politics, and you're not going to get elected. The money's too big. It's too strong. When you got a Republican governor who's funding Democrats, right, at the legislative levels and the governing councils, that tells you everything you need to know.
Well, essentially, they're betting on the winners, and they want to influence the people that are going to actually cast the votes. So that's the way the game is played. And I think Pocahontas used to be a Republican too. And it's the point you were making, that she changed her allegiance to get elected, and she's been in power ever since.
Well, you think about it, right? If you just look at some of the facts that are here, the power comes from the money, right?
Yeah.
And when you get one party rule, corruption is an outcome of that type of situation. It's not a maybe, it's a will be. It happens. And we've seen it in Washington, right? We've seen it in our own state. We've seen it in Rhode Island. We've seen it in some other places, New York and others. They're there everywhere. The problem you have is, if you think about it, and you look down there into Washington, D.C., keep going back there, because I think that's where people can see it the best. Regardless of who you wanted for president last time, and if you look at the last 4 years, if you're going to commit a crime in Washington, D.C., and you were a Democrat, the chances of you being prosecuted are 0 to none, which is the same number. It isn't going to happen. Everybody knows who did the scandals with the FISA courts, right? Everybody knows that. The bottom line is the Supreme Court justice controls the FISA judges. He had to be aware of what was going on, and yet they know who did it. And you think that Durham and them can come forward? I look at the attorney general that Trump had, the last one, and here's a guy, brilliant, but he can't beat the system. If he goes to court in the Supreme Court District of DC, there's no way you can get a conviction. None.
Yeah.
If you go with if you're prosecuting a Republican, yes, you can. You're prosecuting a Democrat, you're not. That's a dangerous situation for the country to be in, where there's rules for them and rules for the rest of us, meaning anybody else in America.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sorry.
Go ahead. A sad commentary is the election campaign of this Dr. Sheba that ran for Senate the last time.
Yes.
He has a lawsuit pending with regard to tampering in the election, and his best foot forward on explaining this is that all of the counties that use voting machines had him basically losing to the opponent with the same percentage of votes, aside from the one county, and I think it's Claremont, if I get it right, that hand counted, where he won almost 60-40. Some real unethical stuff is going on in this state, I believe, and I certainly do hope that he succeeds with his lawsuit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of discouraging at one point, but we can't lose faith in the fact that, but we can't also sit back and wait for, the elected officials down in Washington to actually fix problems, right? It just isn't going to happen. Even the Supreme Court didn't even step up this time around. we're on very dangerous ground going forward. Very dangerous ground.
If you think about what's been going on with these COVID shutdowns, and the governor of any state you want to pick, they're all the same, decides, oh, everybody's going to shut down, go home, stay there, and don't come back. What kind of constitutional rights does that entail? Where did that come from? And yet nobody is really challenging it. And then we can get into the academics of whether the numbers show it worked or not. But just from the point of view of, we've got a constitution that says you can do certain things, and the constitution mostly says the government can't do certain things.
Correct.
And do we have to have a constitutional amendment to say that the governor can't shut the state down? Do we have to have an amendment in every state to say that the governor can't shut the state down?
I think you need a governor who understands how to govern, rather than be governed themselves by the kind of outfits that Jim was talking about, who provide the funding. I mean, that's the baseline problem.
Well, most of these elections come down to a popularity contest, and the popularity contest is driven by FaceTime on either Twitter or YouTube or mainstream media, and every one of them costs money.
It's a very interesting thing, Judge, you bring up, because when they do the polling in terms of surveys and everything about the popularity of Congress and so forth, it always has less than a 20% favorable rating. And yet all of us, and I'll throw myself in there because I'm no different than anybody else, everybody's a crook down there except for the guy I elect.
Yeah,
right? That's the mentality. And it happens that way all over the country.
It just comes down to throw all the bums out except my bum.
Exactly. At least he's a nice guy or a nice gal, right?
Yeah.
That's how we go.
Hey,
right?
This is babies. Anyway, I guess we've had about a half hour's worth of fun. And like most of these things, you get very frustrated because I don't see a solution. Neither of you two, I believe see a solution. And the issue comes down to, we have an election and it's a popularity contest, and it's driven by money. And I'm still stymied as how are we going to change this? And I don't know.
Well,
I'm going to buy myself a technology company that rigs the election.
Yeah.
There you go. If I can sign up for the anti-incumbent party, I'd be there in a minute.
Yeah. Any possibility. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for staying with us tonight. And again, like I always say at the end of the show, if you got a different opinion and you want to have your voice heard, and the credits is my email address. Send me an email or contact me through BevCam, where you can watch this show, and we'll get your 2 cents worth in. And again, thanks for watching, and gentlemen, thanks for joining us this evening. And good night, all.
Thank you, George.